The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, each drop against the window seeming to echo the emptiness that had settled into Margaret's heart. She stood in the kitchen of the house she had shared with Robert for 23 years, watching. The water streaked down the glass, blurring the world outside into watercolor smudges of grey and green. 6 months had passed since the funeral, yet the silence still felt deafening. At 52, Margaret had never imagined she would be navigating life alone. Robert had been her anchor, her compass, her constant companion through everything life had thrown their way. Now, even the simplest decisions felt overwhelming. What to have for dinner, which television program to watch, whether to keep the thermostat at the temperature Robert had always preferred. But what made the loneliness even more complex was the presence of David, Robert's son from his first marriage. At 34, David had moved back into the family, home after his father's passing, ostensibly to help Margaret manage the estate and provide emotional support. What neither of them had anticipated was how his presence would stir feelings that Margaret didn't dare acknowledge, even to herself. The sound of the front door opening pulled her from her thoughts. David's voice called out through the hallway, warm and familiar in a way that made her heart skip in a manner she found both comforting and unsettling. "Margaret, I picked up groceries on my way home, and I have something I want to show you." She turned from the window, smoothing down her navy sweater and running her fingers through her shoulder-length auburn hair. Even in grief, she found herself caring about her appearance when David was around, a realization that brought a flush of guilt to her cheeks. "In the kitchen," she called back, her voice softer than she intended. David appeared in the doorway, his dark hair damp from the rain, carrying 2 bags of groceries and wearing the kind of gentle smile that reminded Margaret so much of Robert. It made her breath catch. But where Robert had been steady and predictable, David carried an energy that was more intense, more immediate. His eyes, the same deep brown as his father's, held depths that seemed to see right through her careful composure. "You look like you've been contemplating the meaning of life," he said, setting the bags on the counter. "Or maybe just watching the rain." Margaret managed a small smile. "A little of both, I suppose. This weather makes everything feel so heavy." David began unpacking the groceries, his movements efficient and familiar. Over the past months, he had seamlessly integrated into the household routines, filling spaces that Robert had left empty. But unlike Robert's quiet, methodical approach to daily tasks, David brought a vitality that made ordinary moments feel charged with possibility. "I have something that might lighten the mood," he said, producing a small wrapped package from one of the bags. "I found this at that antique shop downtown. The moment I saw it, I knew you had to have it." Margaret's fingers trembled slightly as she accepted the gift. The wrapping was simple brown paper tied with a cream-colored ribbon, but the thought behind it touched something deep in her chest. She carefully untied the ribbon and unwrapped the paper to reveal a delicate music box, its surface adorned with intricate silver roses. "David, this is beautiful," she whispered, turning it over in her hands. "But you shouldn't have." "Open it," he interrupted gently, stepping closer. The scent of his cologne, something woodsy and warm, made her suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd been this close to someone. She lifted the lid, and a soft melody began to play, La Vie en Rose, while a tiny couple danced. In the center of the box, the music was hauntingly beautiful, and Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes. "This was playing at the cafe the day your father first told me he loved me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know?" David's hand came to rest gently on her shoulder. "He told me about that day, about how you two danced in the rain afterward, and how he knew in that moment that you were the love of his life." The weight of his touch, the intimacy of the memory, the way the music seemed to fill the space between them. It all became too much. Margaret felt a sob escape her throat, and before she could stop herself, she was crying in earnest, her shoulders shaking with the force of grief she'd been holding back for months. Without hesitation, David's arms came around her, pulling her against his chest. She should have stepped away, should have maintained the boundaries that propriety demanded. Instead, she found herself melting into his embrace, her face pressed against the soft fabric of his shirt, breathing in his warmth and strength. "I miss him so much," she whispered against his chest. "Some days I don't know how to keep going." David's hand stroked her hair with infinite tenderness. "I know," he murmured. "I miss him too. But Margaret, he wouldn't want you to stop living. He'd want you to find joy again, to find ... connection." Something in his tone made her look up at him, and she found herself caught in the intensity of his gaze. His face was inches from hers, and she could see the conflict playing out in his eyes. The same struggle between what was appropriate and what was felt that had been tormenting her for weeks. "David," she began, but he shook his head. "Slightly. I know this is complicated," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know people might not understand, but what I feel for you, it's not just about grief or loneliness. It's about the woman you are, your strength, your grace, the way you loved my father so completely, the way you make me want to be a better man." Margaret's heart was racing, her mind spinning with the implications of his words. This was territory she had never imagined navigating, feelings she had never expected to experience. David wasn't just anyone, he was Robert's son, nearly 20 years her junior, someone she had watched grow from a teenager into the man he had become. Yet standing there in his arms, feeling more alive than she had in months, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. It wasn't just physical attraction, though that was certainly present. It was something deeper, a recognition of kindred spirits, of two people who had loved the same man, and now found themselves discovering something unexpected in each other. "This is crazy," she whispered, but she didn't pull away. "Maybe," David agreed, his thumb tracing a gentle line along her cheek. "But sometimes the most important things in life are a little crazy." The music box continued to play its sweet melody, the tiny couple spinning in their eternal dance. Margaret closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to take this leap, to explore these feelings that had been growing between them, despite every rational reason they shouldn't. When she opened her eyes, David was still watching her with that same intense, hopeful expression. The rain continued to fall outside, but somehow the kitchen felt warmer, filled with possibility rather than emptiness. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. Margaret took a shaky breath. "I'm thinking that your father always said life was too short to waste on regrets. I'm thinking that maybe he would understand." David's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "He would want you to be happy, Margaret. Above all else, he would want that." She knew he was right. Robert had been the most generous, loving man she had ever known. Even in his final days, when the cancer had taken so much from him, he had been more concerned about her future than his own comfort. He had made her promise to keep living, to find joy again, to not let grief consume the years she had left. She had never imagined that promise might lead her here, to this moment with David, to feelings that both terrified and exhilarated her. "I need time," she said finally, "to think about this, to understand what it means." David nodded, though she could see the disappointment flicker briefly in his eyes. "Of course. I don't want to pressure you, Margaret. I just ... I needed you to know how I feel." He stepped back, giving her space, but not before pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. A gesture so tender and full of promise that it made her knees weak. As the evening progressed, they moved around each other with a new awareness. Every accidental touch charged with meaning. David prepared dinner while Margaret set the table, their domestic routine now layered with unspoken possibilities. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did, but underneath the surface, Margaret could feel the current of change pulling them towards something new and uncertain. After dinner, they settled into the living room, David building a fire while Margaret curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea. The music box sat on the coffee table between them, its melody having long since stopped, but its presence a reminder of the moment that had shifted everything. "Tell me about your father when he was younger," Margaret said, surprising herself with the request. "Before I knew him. I want to understand where you get your intensity." David smiled, settling into the armchair across from her. "He was different then. More serious, maybe. My mother's death changed him, made him more cautious about love, more protective of his heart. When he met you, it was like watching someone come back to life." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes again. "He saved me too, you know. I was so lost when we met, so unsure of what I wanted from life. He made me feel like I could be anyone, do anything." "And now?" David asked, his voice gentle but probing. Margaret considered the question, wrapping her hands around her teacup for warmth. "Now I'm trying to figure out who I am without him. It's harder than I expected." "You're still the same woman he fell in love with," David said. "Strong, compassionate, beautiful. You just need to remember how to see yourself that way." The way he said "beautiful" made heat spread through her chest. She found herself really looking at him not as Robert's son, but as a man. He had his father's strong jaw and kind eyes, but there was something uniquely his own in the way he carried himself, in the intensity of his focus when he looked at her. "David," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the thoughts swirling in her mind. "What is it? This thing between us. It's not just about missing your father, is it? It's not just two people clinging to each other out of grief." David was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful and sure. "No, it's not just grief. I've been attracted to you for years, Margaret. Even when my father was alive, I admired your strength, your warmth. I told myself it was just appreciation, just affection for someone who made my father happy. But these past months, being here with you, seeing you navigate loss with such grace. It's become something more." His honesty took her breath away. "Years?" "Years," he confirmed, meeting her eyes. "I would never have acted on it while he was alive. I would never have let myself even fully acknowledge it. But now I can't pretend these feelings don't exist." Margaret set down her teacup with trembling hands. The weight of his confession, the implications of what he was saying, settled over her like a blanket. Part of her wanted to run, to maintain the safe distance of propriety and convention. But another part, a part that had been dormant for too long, wanted to lean into this dangerous, beautiful possibility. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," David said. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Margaret could feel herself at a crossroads, with one path leading back to the safe, familiar territory of grief and solitude, and the other leading into uncharted waters with this man who had somehow become so much more than she had ever imagined possible. Outside, the rain was finally beginning to ease, though the sound of droplets still whispered against the windows. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the warm glow of the room, David looked younger, more vulnerable, and Margaret found herself wanting to comfort him the way he had comforted her. "Come here," she said softly. David looked surprised but didn't hesitate. He moved to sit beside her on the sofa, careful to maintain some distance, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Margaret reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers. His skin was warm and slightly rough from the woodworking he did in his spare time, so different from Robert's soft, academic hands, yet somehow perfectly right. "I can't promise you anything," she said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "I don't know what this is or where it could lead. But I think I'd like to find out." David's smile was radiant. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance." They sat in comfortable silence, hands entwined, watching the fire burn lower. Margaret marveled at how natural it felt. How right, despite all the reasons it should feel wrong. When David finally spoke again, his voice was soft with wonder. "He would be happy for us, you know. My father. He always said that love was the most important thing in life, not just romantic love, but all kinds of love. Connection. Understanding. He'd want us to find that with each other if we could." Margaret squeezed his hand. "I hope you're right." "I am," David said with quiet certainty. "I know him and I know you. This isn't betrayal, Margaret. This is life continuing, love finding a way to grow in unexpected places." As the evening drew to a close, they lingered on the sofa, reluctant to break the spell of intimacy they had created. When David finally stood to go to his room, he paused beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being brave enough to consider this, for not shutting me out." Margaret covered his hand with hers. "Thank you for the music box, for the reminder that beautiful things can still happen, even in the midst of loss." David leaned down and pressed another soft kiss to her forehead, this one lingering a moment longer than the first. "Sweet dreams, Margaret." As she watched him go, Margaret felt a familiar flutter of anticipation in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in so long she had almost forgotten what it was. Hope, not just for healing from her grief, but for something new and wonderful to grow from the ashes of her old life. She picked up the music box from the coffee table, winding it once more to hear the gentle melody of La Vie en Rose. As the tiny couple danced their eternal dance, she thought about second chances, about the courage it took to open one's heart again, and about the mysterious ways that love could find a person when they least expected it. The rain had stopped completely now, and through the window, she could see the first stars beginning to appear in the clearing sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions to answer, new territory to navigate. But tonight, for the first time in months, Margaret felt truly alive. She carried the music box upstairs to her bedroom, placing it on the knitstand where she could see it first thing in the morning. As she prepared for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and was surprised to see a woman who looked younger, more vibrant than she had in months. Her eyes held a spark that had been missing, a light that David had somehow rekindled. Lying in bed, listening to the house settle around her, Margaret allowed herself to imagine what the future might hold. It was uncertain, yes, and complicated in ways she couldn't even begin to fathom. But it was also full of possibility, full of the potential for joy and connection she had thought she might never feel again. As sleep finally claimed her, Margaret dreamed of dancing in the rain, of music boxes and gentle kisses, of a man with kind eyes who saw her not as a grieving widow, but as a woman worthy of love. In her dream, Robert was there too, smiling his approval, his hand on David's shoulder as he gave them both his blessing. When she woke the next morning to sunlight, Streaming through her windows, Margaret knew that something fundamental had shifted. The long, dark winter of her grief was beginning to give way to spring, and with it, the promise of new growth, new love, and new reasons to believe in the beauty of life. The music box sat silently on her knitstand, waiting for her to wind it. Again, waiting to fill the room with its sweet melody of hope and possibility. And somewhere in the house, David was also waking to this new day, this new beginning they would navigate together, one careful step at a time. Love, Margaret was learning, had its own timeline, its own logic. It couldn't be rushed or forced, but when it arrived, unexpected, transformative, and utterly right, it had the power to heal even the deepest wounds and create beauty from the most unlikely circumstances. The story of Margaret and David was just beginning, written in the language of second chances and the courage to believe that the heart, no matter how broken, could always learn to love again.